This is Timely Talk with Drew and Emma Folks.
Hey,
Andrew Snorton and Emma Folks.
Hey, thanks. Good afternoon, Emma. Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully everyone's having a good day and a good week. And before we get started, definitely wishing everybody a healthy and happy holiday season. Don't let the stressors of the year get to you. Please take time to enjoy and embrace the beauty of the holiday season.
Yeah, one thing I like about, no one likes the cold unless you're, one of those real northern people. But one of the things that I've learned about the cold and the seasons is you have to kind of go with the flow. And just like animals hibernate for the winter, when it starts to get cold, we by nature want to slow down. We don't want to go out as much. And, we try to fight against that by going out and staying at the same speed. And sometimes we need to just go with the flow. If nature's saying, it's cold outside, do what the animals do. Just slow it down a little bit, eat some comfort food, hang out with your buddies, hang out with your friends.
Either
right?
that or bundle up and I kid around. It's like move quickly. And then when the wind pauses or what have you, make your way. But like you said, the seasons are going to come. And even though in recent years it seems like the season is here, then there's a little hiccup where it's like a spike for a day. You just think about this past weekend, like this past Friday, it dropped down about like 30, 35 degrees. But then like Saturday evening, the temperature trended up to like 55 or 60 and then dropped back down. So you still just try to make the adjustments you can, and you understand, look, change of seasons, things are going to be a little bit different. Just try to make those adjustments and make the most of it and have some fun with it too.
Yeah, and with those changes, we've also had a change in our country.
Really? What type of change would that be?
A change of the norm. Our new normal, being politically correct, was kind of not the thing. I think there are a lot of people who wanted to go back to the way things used to be. Unfortunately, the cart is left or the train has left that station. So, and that's something that, I think you and I have had several conversations about, is what our new normal is going to look like going forward. There was a lot of talk about there being a war on Christmas, and a war on, a lot of other things. And right now, I think one of the most important things that we, as African Americans or minorities, have to realize is we can't rely on anybody else anymore.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think, number one, don't get me wrong, people are entitled to what they think. There's no issue with that, but I think the way that the message is delivered and how people think, just because they feel a certain way, gives them license to act a certain way, and that's the difference. We can disagree on something, and we have every right to disagree on things, but it really shouldn't go any further than that. When you feel like that is license for you, when you see some of the responses that have been made and the comments that have been made, and the fact that people feel like they can do whatever, that's a very dangerous situation. What does that mean? What does that mean for people in general? You've got to be, you definitely have to be centered. And what that means is you've got to look out for what's going to be in the best interests of your family or community or things along those lines. Hey, wow, we got a call. Not now. Not yet. We can't take calls right now, but we're going to soon enough. So I'll let this ring out and then make sure I have this totally shut off. So bear with me. But I think, one of the first things we have to look at is we do have to look inward. Some people made the argument that, when it was segregation, it was better for people. And I'm not going to necessarily agree with that, but one thing I will agree with is the fact that when you think about, let's say, your economic structure or things along those lines, you had to buy from your mom and pop. You had to buy from your neighborhood. So when you think about some of those examples of like Tulsa, is the first thing that comes to mind with Black Wall Street, how everything was so concentrated with the hospital system to movie theaters, the banking and what have you. There are definite lessons learned from that era in regards to how to do a better job of, I'll say, internal investment, and using that as leverage when you're dealing with some of these bigger issues. We kind of know what's going to happen with the upcoming administration. We know that it's going to be a very narrow view. We know that it's going to be looked through the lens of white upper class males, which means that cuts out a lot of people, not only gender-wise, ethnic background, orientation, preference, disabilities, things of that nature. and it means that we have to do a better job of tightening up things internally so we can do a better job of fighting those external battles that have to be fought, because even if this is going to be, quote, the new norm, it doesn't mean you have to accept it.
Correct. And I think, to take it a step further, I don't think it's the upper class white males. I think it's rich. I think we need to call it what it is.
Okay.
I feel that they're we as middle class. The middle class has to fight and scrape for everything at this point. The middle class is going through a retirement crisis. The middle class is going through an income crisis. And the people that are being put in place in this administration are not looking out for people that work for them. They're looking out for themselves.
I would agree. I think that, and also you have people that are so disconnected from whence they came. Like Ben Carson's the first example that comes to mind. The very things that he talked about gutting are the very things that he benefited from.
Right.
And I think what's sad is people who have come from, let's say, adverse situations, for lack of a better term, once they've made it, I think for some people, they get too blinded by the fact that they've made it. And then you put him as the director of HUD. The man has no knowledge of housing. Why would you put him there? So part of it is he's already being set up to fail as is and doesn't even know it, because he's letting his pride and ego blind him in his better judgment. And when you look at the makeup of these cabinet people and what have you, it's like, it's not even a comedy of errors. It's like more like Aretha Franklin saying a chain of fools. Like, it really is. Like, look, just because I've ridden on an airplane doesn't mean I know how to fly it. Seriously, just because I lived in HUD housing doesn't mean I know how to manage it from that standpoint, make the proper investments, infrastructure, those types of things. So, but then again, you've got a guy who's never served any office. You've got a man that's had at least documented 5 bankruptcies, including one I remember when I was in high school. How are you going to learn how to deal with adversity when during bankruptcy you're given $1 million a month allowance? I mean, that was back in the late 80s, early 90s. So you've got someone who is ill-informed, making ill-informed decisions, but it still comes back to being aware that those are the cards that you're dealt with. What adjustments are you going to make? Which means, like you've alluded to before, we have to do a better job of tightening up our own houses.
Correct.
Number one. So that way, if we do a better job of doing that, then we're in a better position to make the focused, steady platform, timetable, things along those lines in chipping away. Understanding you might not totally get rid of something, but you can do a better job of keeping, certain things in check. And I say this before you go to that point. I remember when we were talking, and one of the organizations I worked with did a political mixer just before the elections. I remember the gentleman was representative like Lawrenceville Swanee for the State House.
Okay.
And when we hear the word lobbying, we think about the paid lobbyists and what have you, but we forget the power of that phone call, that letter, that email.
Correct.
To make a long story short, he was going to vote a certain way on a measure. He reread about 10 to 15 emails from his constituents, looked at what they were saying and saw that they made more sense about it than he did, and he changed his vote. So when we talk about knowing that you're dealing with a chain of fools and having to tighten up what we need to do internally, there are still things we can do to do some type of check and balance. It doesn't mean it's always going to happen, but we know what happens if you don't make the phone call or the letter or the email. So even if you don't have the money to do a weekly, I'm showing up to the Gold Dome or I'm showing up to Washington, it doesn't mean there aren't avenues for your voice to be heard.
Yeah, no, one of the things too is that, and you mentioned it's more than just writing a letter, sending an email. It's giving another point of view, and it's also giving a solution. Don't just address the problem. Don't tell a politician that they're stupid, and that's you're not going to get anywhere with that. That's the quickest way to have somebody hit delete, right?
Yeah. But you're right, because I think, and we talked about this, there's nothing wrong with articulating how you feel about something. Right. But now you've articulated how you feel. What do you think is a possible way to better address the problem solve? So you're pointing out, I'm not in agreement. I don't agree with this. But here's that the option that you give is making sure it's as wide casting as possible. Don't say, I don't like certain people, and I think the best way to do them is deport them. I'm like, dude, you're crazy.
Why?
Why? You're crazy, because people might think the same thing about you and your cantankerous self. Right. But if you're sitting here, like, let's say, for example, we'll say, I don't know, recreational services. Think about your parks and recreation. And if you feel like, well, the system, based on the resources or the buildings, their facilities are dilapidated, blah, blah, blah. And this shouldn't be the case, because we know if we have these types of options, here are the benefits, whether it's after school, weekend, community. So is there a way that we can revisit the budgeting? So let's say if, I don't know, $1 million is earmarked, is there a way to bump it up gradually, let's say to 1.2, 1.3, and then what can we do to do a better job of bringing your small business, your mid-size, your corporate community to help offset that and do more partnerships? So now all of a sudden you're getting the resources that you need, you're providing the services that you need. That's a way where you're saying, I'm not happy with what's going on with Parks and Recreation, but in addition to what can be done, we'll say with government budgets, what can be better done for these collaborative partnerships? Right. That's how you problem solve, and then you create your platform and action plan. So year one, your goal is to get, 20 businesses on board. Stick with them for 2 years, and then you use that to leverage more and more, so you're getting the resources pumped in, whether it's financial, in-kind, volunteers, whatever. More awareness on press and media, so now the general public is like, oh, I didn't know this was here. Right. Oh, I didn't know this was going on here. So there's models out there. So reinvent is not necessarily you have to reinvent the wheel. You look at models out there, especially with this public-private partnership piece. I think that's going to be huge, and that's where some of our discussion has to go.
So when you talked about cleaning house and kind of fixing our own self first. What is your opinion on, I know I'm a professional, you're a professional, and there are a lot of minority professionals who don't want to work with each other because of the lack of customer service, the lack of follow-through, so if we're gonna, talk about kumbayaing and trying to keep things in-house, certain things do have to change.
Yeah, I agree. I think what happens is with the whole customer service piece, there are customer service issues within any ethnic group. There really are. There are. I think what happens is when you look at, African American, people of color, however you want to phrase it, when it happens there, it's more magnified. Now, there are some quality black-owned businesses that are out there. We've seen it from the larger corporations to smaller businesses. So we've seen that. I think what happens is when you have that experience where you're doing more of a follow-up than somebody else is, or let's say if they're even today, I was supposed to be here at 2, but I'm like, hey, I'm letting you know, here's what's going on. No, I'm just being honest. Right. At least if you're running behind, you're communicating and giving somebody a point of reference. But if you're supposed to be somewhere at 2 and you show up at 4 and then you do a half behind a job while you're there, it's going to leave a bitter taste in your mouth. So I think one of the things we have to do is when we look at, within the business community, we have to look at standard best practices and adopt those. And it doesn't mean that, what I'm doing is wrong. It's like we're trying to see what you're doing well and what you can do better. Yeah. So if you know that your follow-up skills are kind of so-so, then that's where you give a window fall between 24 to 72 hours. So that way you're like, okay, I got 3 days to make this happen. At least if you state that up front, right. If you're following up 2 days later or 3 days later, you're still following up within that window.
See, I think we need to take it, even a step further. If we're dealing with, if you're a lawyer, a CPA, a financial planner, you need to, if you can't do it, hire somebody else to do it. It doesn't cost that much. You can get an assistant. You can even get a virtual assistant. But the lack of customer service, the lack of follow through has really hurt us, to the point where we don't refer to each other.
It hurts. And then what happens is there are quality businesses that are out there, but because you had a bad experience with one, what happens is we've got to understand, just because we had a bad experience with one entity, that's not reflective of all, but we're very quick, and that taps into other different things, but we're very quick. If we've had one negative experience, then we use that as a blanket statement for everybody. So it goes twofold. Do businesses have to do a better job? The answer is yes, but by the same token, the consumer has to leave that issue with that one entity and not apply it to everybody. Because, for example, there could be a non-black owned business that makes that same type of mistake. But how quick are people to go ahead and do a blanket statement and say all Asian businesses or all Caucasian businesses are this way? We're not as quick to do that. So we have to take a step back and see, why are we hypercritical? And that ties in.
That's a society thing.
Well, it is a societal thing. It's a deeper issue regarding like subconscious bias and things along those lines. But we have to leave our criticism. If we had a bad experience, and that's business or what have you, where that bad experience is limited to that one person, that one entity, to make a broad blanket statement means you're cutting yourself out from quality businesses that can that are doing a quality job. But like I said, because you had a bad experience with one, that's everybody, and that's not true. It's just not true.
Yeah, it isn't true. Now, another area where I really feel we need to clean house, and not just in our community, I think as a country, has to do with the millennials. There are a lot of stereotypes, very blanketed stereotypes about them being lazy, just a lot of negative connotations that come along with it. And I know you do a lot of work with young people. What are your thoughts on that?
Here's my take. I think we forget how talented young people really are. Like, you think about like use of technology is the first thing that comes to mind. When you have like little kids that are like doing video shoots and whatnot, like we here's some things we got to understand about younger people. Number one, they have talents and abilities. Our job is to help them align those talents and abilities with something that they can constructively do. It's about, access to resources and giving people a chance like other people gave you a chance. We also have to understand that the way that we did things, it might not always fit the way that they're going to do it. And it's almost like, here's a good analogy. It's like if you sit in a classroom, especially if it's, and I hate to single them out, but if it's like an older veteran teacher or even a younger teacher, they're going to instruct based on the way that they learned.
Right.
Now, is there anything inherently wrong with that? No. The problem is the 20, 25, 30, 35 kids in that classroom aren't going to all learn the same way. Just as you look at learning styles and learning preferences, you have to be open to doing a little bit of everything. So that means you can start off with a lecture to introduce and maybe do a lecture to conclude. But in the meantime, you have to be open to using video or small groups or vignettes or what have you, because that way you're doing a better job of casting a wider net.
Right.
Well, it's the same principle with young people. There's some truth that there's some degree of laziness, but that's everybody.
I was like, that's everybody.
I think we've got to understand that with the advent of technology and a couple other things, and the fact that young people are going to do things differently from how we do them. It doesn't make it right, it doesn't make it wrong. Sometimes what they do is more efficient than what we do, and we've got to be open to giving them a platform to go ahead and explore and develop those skill sets and figure it out. So if someone's great with using video and technology, we should push them in communications. We really should. Or if someone's involved in, interested in music, even on the entertainment end, encourage them to take at least an accounting class or something along those lines. So maybe they won't get taken advantage of as much when they're outsourcing it. No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
That they're not taking advantage
of. Learn about the law.
Yeah, no. So we've just got to be open. But the same criticism we have of young people are probably the same criticism people had when we were young.
I don't remember it being like it is now, and I don't know if that's because we didn't have social media.
I think
then.
it's just because I think social media is a gift and a curse. It's a gift because you're able to do things easier and quicker, but it's also a curse because you see things easier and quicker.
Yeah.
I think like growing up in our day, you were like, it was like you still had the labeling, you still had the fringe elements, but I think what happens is it was kind of limited to like your neighborhood. You didn't see it other than in your community, like the area where you grew up or went to school.
Right.
Now it's like you can see it in mass. Like, think about how on social media you can have a chat with somebody that's living in another state or another country.
Yeah.
Even video that's uploaded, you can see it just about anywhere now, especially if it goes viral, and especially if it gets that type of traction. So I think because we're seeing things in a higher volume, in a higher traction, it's like now all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But I kind of have to agree. Some of those same issues have always been there. We just didn't see them as frequently.
Yeah,
because it was just so limited.
Yeah, and I feel I've been doing some work with some millennials, and the way, the viewpoint, they come at things from a totally different perspective, and it's because of their point of reference. What's relative to them is the internet, is the tablets and everything else. So when there's an issue, when they come to address the issue, a lot of times we have to let go of our ego. We don't want a younger person to seem smarter than us or know more than us.
Yeah, that's true.
And sometimes you have to just set that aside, leave your ego at the door, and ask them. They call it red teaming. When you come in and you poke holes and stuff. If you have a brilliant idea or a good idea or something you're trying to do, share it with a young person and watch what they do with it.
Young people will go in directions that you will never imagine.
Yes.
And you have to be open to that. It's just like, they know people you don't know. And because there's more younger people than there are older people, and you're trying to bridge and bring people together, I mean, that's huge. You think about, like, even with press and media, you've got to realize that, social media in general allows you to capture people that you know, but there's a whole universe of people out there that you don't know. So you still have to utilize your traditional means of television, not so much newspapers, since most stuff is online now, radio, and things of that nature, because that's an audience out there that you don't know that maybe needs to hear of what you're working on, what you're doing, what services you provide, things along those lines. So you have to be open. They say you got to be open and at least listen to what someone has to say. You don't necessarily have to agree with it, but listen to what they have to say so you know where they're coming from.
Right.
And now I know where you're coming from, we can do a better job of figuring out where do we overlap, where do we meet, and go from there and just have some more fun with it.
Now, one of the things that I've noticed with the younger generation is their focus is on saving money. Doing things, and I hate saying the right way, right? The way because a lot of them have kind of come out of school during the recession, and they've seen their parents get beat up with their finances.
Right.
They've seen, the housing market crash. They've come out and they weren't able to get a job, right? So a lot of them now are saving money. They're concerned about their future. They're concerned about things in their 20s that, we weren't thinking about till we were in our 40s, right? So when I'm looking at this group of young people, and I even have some as clients, and I'm thinking, man, if I had the forethought or to think the way you're thinking now, I would be in such a different place.
Right.
So it's very, I have confidence in the younger generation. I think they're not going to stand for a lot of stuff. I think they're going to be a lot more vocal, and they'll figure out how to utilize the power that they have.
I agree. Like, we forget how savvy young people really are. We assume youth comes with, youth experience or expertise. And no, there are more young people that are a lot more in tune than what you think. You have to take time to talk with and listen to them. And with the ability that they have to utilize their different platforms, understanding the power of their platforms, the potential that they have is like ridiculous. Like, seriously, they can potentially be some of those major game changers.
Right.
But then when you think from a historical standpoint, you think about like the civil rights movement, what really swung the pendulum, it wasn't like the 30 and 40-year-olds. It was what happened in Birmingham.
The lunch counters.
It was the lunch counters were college kids.
Right.
Like, that was like 18, 19-year-olds. Or even what happened in Birmingham when people were getting hosed, those were more like 11, 12, 13-year-old kids that were getting hosed down and arrested. And when people saw it, they're like, it was less of, quote, a black issue. It's like, these are kids getting pummeled. What the heck is going on down there?
Right.
So young people, we've quote tried to water down the impact that young people have really had in any movement or anything or any innovation. The main reason why those of us like 40 and older using technology more is because of people 10 and 15 using it all the time. We're trying to make sure we can still communicate with them. No, seriously.
I just got a new phone. Help me with this.
Yeah, no, I'm like so serious. Like, you think about those of us now that have like their laptop and their tablet and your camera and this type of program. Part of the reason we're doing it is because that's what young people are doing.
Right.
We're trying, in some degrees, we're trying to keep up with younger people.
We don't want to be left behind.
We don't want to be left behind. And so a lot of changes have really come from the bottom up. That's what people don't realize.
It's a good way of looking at that.
I mean, it really has. You think about it. Like 5 years ago, people weren't thinking about getting a tablet. They weren't.
Now you can't have.
Now you can't function with. I mean,
one.
you can function without one, but especially if it's something on the go. Think about what you can do with the tablet now. You can do essential video editing and all that type of stuff.
You can read. I mean, you take it on vacations. There's so many things.
So many things you can do, but
it's almost a necessity.
You weren't thinking about it 5 years ago. But like I said, because what you see young people doing, you know, people weren't thinking about hitting the Quan, and then it's like, I'm just being silly in regards to, no, like when you see like even some different, just general trends, that stuff comes from younger folks.
Right.
And now you're like, oh, that's garbage. But then, you know, let somebody be at a holiday party and they're having a really nice time, and it's amazing what unleashes.
Hey, listen, we wore clothes. Our generation wore clothes backwards.
Yes,
Out,
exactly.
so
Exactly.
we can't say anything. You know, I read an article recently that said that about 40% of young people, young adults, are living with their family. Right. So it's like the highest concentration of young people living with their parents since the Depression era.
Right.
And the way the article was written, it kind of made it sound like a horrible thing. And I thought about it, you know, and I said, wait a minute. If a young person is able to move back home, and I don't condone boomerang kids, but, you know, and my son doesn't live with me, and I love it that way. But if you think about it, if a child graduates from college, and before they go off and get their own place, they're at home and they're, you know, with conditions. Okay, you're at home with conditions. You can stay here. You pay X amount of rent, X amount of utilities, but you take the income that you're making to put save up for a down payment for a house, and to pay down on some of the, if you have student loans or credit cards or whatever bills. Think of how much further ahead they would be in life with that.
That makes a lot of sense. And the thing is, there are different ethnic groups that do that. One of the first things that come to mind is the Jewish community. They do that all the time.
Right.
I mean, and that's not stereotyping, but I'm thinking like the area where I grew up in, it wouldn't be uncommon for it to be a larger residence and you had two families in there.
Right.
And part of it was just for those very reasons. It was really about, it was about helping people get themselves together before they went out. And then it was also wealth building too, because what happens, you duplicate that.
Right.
You duplicate successful models. So like you said, you just don't want to have somebody, lounging around.
Right.
But by the same token, it's like, okay, here's what we can do for a year, and we'll revisit it after a year.
Right.
And if it seems like we need to extend it, cool. If it's like you're in the shape that you need to be in, then we'll go ahead.
And that's where the parameters come in.
And I think that helps with like responsibility, accountability, and you're helping someone build the skills that they might not have been taught, even if they lived under your household.
Right.
Just because they saw it doesn't mean they know it. Just like because you've ridden a car doesn't mean you know how to drive a car. You still have to, quote, be taught how to do it.
Right.
So it's the same principle. So there's really nothing inherently wrong with that. I think, like I said, you agree to, like you said, what those parameters are going to be, the timetables and things along those lines, and let's say if it's going to be a year, so each quarter you're checking progress like you would anything else. That's modeling a lot of things. That's modeling what happens when you have your quarterly work review.
Right.
No, I mean, it really does a lot of modeling. So now when they go out there, it's like, oh, it's not that big a deal because I've been doing this.
Yeah, you're being held accountable. You can't just live for free. You can't just do certain things. If you want to build wealth, if you want to create a legacy, you have to be responsible and held accountable for certain things.
Right.
And that's where I'm thinking now with our community, people need to start taking things serious. We can't rely on Social Security. If you're under 55 and you even have the thought that Social Security is going to be your lifeblood for retirement,
that's wrong.
You're in big trouble, right? So now is the time to start thinking about things that appreciate and things that depreciate. Where are you buying your house? One of the big things with me is location, right? Where are you buying your house? When you are ready to sell your house or move on to the next one and rent it out, are you in a location with a good school? We have to start thinking about things like that. Right. We have to start thinking about
and then other things,
putting crime.
Well, you gotta look at a lot of stuff, like you said, looking at crime statistics, looking at just other business growth,
Yeah.
things of that nature. So you have to look at a lot more pieces of the puzzle. You
Yeah.
definitely have to.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you
Oh, thanks a lot.
for chatting with me today. It's way overdue, and I know we'll be doing it again soon.
Yeah, definitely. This is a lot of fun. Thank you, everyone else that's out there that took time to listen in, and some things to think about and things along those lines. Look forward to doing it again. And like I said, have a great holiday season. Seriously.
And how can people reach you if they want to see your blog? And
oh yeah,
why don't you give
definitely.
your
Well,
contact?
the easiest way for my business, Creative Community Solutions LLC, the website is ASNorton, ASNORTON, CCS.com. Usually every Wednesday I do a weekly business blog. Some of it is talking about what we're doing. Some of it is talking about what people who we've worked with are doing. Some of it might be just general, especially with the end of November, talking about the whole holiday dynamic. I think that one, some people hit me back, like, were you talking about? He's like, no, part of it was talking about me. I'll be honest, part of it was talking about me, but part of it was knowing that the holidays will spike different things. If things are going well, it's going to be an added spike. When things aren't going well, it's going to be a negative spike and stress. But like I said, ASNortonCCS.com and on Facebook, Creative Community Solutions LLC would be the two easiest ways. I guess nonprofit, I'll do the nonprofit to keep it simple. Nonprofit, the Lead Foundation. So the website is www.theleadfoundation.org. And on the social media platform, Facebook, just type in the Lead Foundation. And then for Twitter and Instagram, they're the same handle, LEADFDN. And yeah, Wednesdays are usually the big days because I'll do the foundation newsletter in the morning, and then in the afternoon I'll do the business blog.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy.
Oh, thanks. It's been a pleasure. Looking forward to being
Always.
back. Please, now you can call in. Make sure I come back. Pocket square, what do you call those things you put around your neck?